Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
We'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Democracy cannot succeed unless those who express their choice are prepared to choose wisely. The real safeguard of democracy, therefore, is education. Words spoken by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt some 60 years ago. Welcome to tonight's forum. On behalf of the WestStar Leadership Program, I'd like to welcome you. And speaking of WestStar, I know we have a lot of members of this year's class here and also alumni. So if you are a WestStar alum or a member of the class of 2018, if you would please stand. And remain standing for just a moment. It's because of you is what we're doing, shaping the future of West Tennessee and therefore impacting the entire state of Tennessee. So thank you for your commitment of time and energy to helping us meet our goal. Thank you. Also would like to thank those who are current office holders and those who are running for office. So if you are an elected official at the city, county, state, or federal level, or if you are seeking office at these levels, if you would also please stand. Thank you for your commitment to our great democracy. Tonight we bring together candidates with different ideas, different leadership styles, and different goals. Our job is to provide you, our guest, the opportunity to listen and to learn. We ask that you be respectful of each and every candidate and of their opinions. I would also like to go over just a few housekeeping items. The restrooms, most important to me, outside the door and to the right. We ask that you remain in your seat while the candidate is on stage. If you do have to leave in case of an emergency, please do so as quietly as possible, and please know that you will not be able to regain entry into the auditorium until the candidate is off the stage. The doors will remain closed while a candidate is on stage. And finally, the views presented here tonight by the candidates do not reflect those of the University of Tennessee, the University of Tennessee at Martin, or the WestStar Leadership Program. And at no time does UT Martin or WestStar endorse any candidate or party. Now please welcome to the stage a West Tennessean who really needs no introduction. He's also a fellow WestStar alum, our Chancellor, the University of Tennessee at Martin, Dr. Keith Carver.
Thank you so much. I just want to bring just a few words and thank you all for coming tonight. Coming to UT Martin and being a part of this process, this great political process that makes our country so special. When you think about what we do at UT Martin, you think about education. You think about the students that come here. You think about the great faculty that transmit knowledge. But really, what we want UT Martin to be about, we certainly want to be a great educational institution, but we want to be a great representative of this region, and we want to be a convener. We want to be a convener of people to talk about things and to debate things and to discuss things and things that are critical to our region. And we think that events like tonight allow us to do that. And so we thank you for being here and being part of this process. I want to recognize two of very special educational partners that are here tonight and that are work with us every day to really help our region grow. Dr. Karen Boyer from Dyersburg State, President, is here tonight. We appreciate that. And also Dr. Walter Butler from Bethel University, right down the roads here tonight. We are really blessed with great minds that are leading these institutions at Dyersburg State and at Bethel, and we're so happy to have them as partners. So with that, I'll yield the floor and really just thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Chancellor. As I said earlier, this event is being sponsored by WestStar Leadership Program, but it is also the class project for this year's class. And representing the class of 2018, Mr. Brett Lashley from Benton County, and he is going to bring greetings and introductions.
Well, to many West Tennesseans, and especially the UT Martin family, our moderator kind of needs no introduction, but Meg Kennard Hardy is a political and legal affairs reporter for the Associated Press, who is better known as Meg Kennard to her readers. A native of Memphis, she attended and graduated from St. Mary's Episcopal School and received a BS of Foreign Service in International Politics with a concentration in International Security Studies from the Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. As the only grandchild of Congressman Ed Jones, Meg spent her summers on her grandparents' Yorkville, Tennessee farm. She was a page for Congressman John Tanner, and in college she actually belonged to both the college Republican and Democratic organizations at the same time. This diverse political exposure would prove helpful when her desire to work for the CIA was altered after she joined the staff at the Georgetown Independent, a decision that changed her career plans. After an internship with the Washington Post, Meg worked as an assistant editor at the National Journal before she began her role with the Associated Press, where she's worked for 13 years at what she considers the greatest news organization in the world. In 2008, she was awarded AP Staffer of the Year. Meg prides herself on being truly unbiased in her reporting. She is currently writing her first book, a political biography about her grandfather called Grassroots Politicking: The Life and Legacy of Ed Jones. Meg will co-author this book with her husband Jeffrey, which will be published by UT Press. The Hardys love UT Martin and are dedicated to the legacies of Meg's grandparents, supporting our ag students through the Ed and Lou Jones Distinguished Lecture Series and the Ed Jones Congressional Collection in the Paul Meek Library. Additionally, they support our communication students through the Meg Kennard Endowed Scholarship for Objective Journalism. Meg has also guest lectured at UT Martin and was our fall 2017 commencement speaker. Meg and her husband have 3 children, and they make their home near Columbia, South Carolina, but of course they love coming back here to West Tennessee. To learn more about Meg and her career, visit her website at megkennard.com or follow her on Twitter at Meg Kennard AP. I introduce to you our moderator, Ms. Meg Kennard Hardy.
Thank you, Brett, for that introduction, and thank you to all of the UTM community for having me here tonight. Just a few words from me as your moderator. The candidates here tonight have been made aware of the topics that we will be discussing, but they have not been given specific questions. I have been reviewing some of the previous forums in which they have been involved over this very long campaign season, and we'll be using tonight to hopefully get some brass tacks specifics from them on some of the issues that I know are important to all of you. Also, as your moderator, I want to let you know candidates are being limited to 15 minutes, but I will be using discretion somewhat, if needed, to get more into specific details and answers. Finally, the candidates are being kept separate without knowledge or access to the live stream from tonight's event. so they will not be apprised of each other's answers or the specific questions thereto before they come to the stage. So with that, let's begin. The first candidate from whom we will be hearing tonight is former Nashville Mayor Karl Dean. Good evening. Welcome. Good to see you. Thank you for being here.
After that long walk in, I felt like the condemned coming in here. Right?
It's just a little way to get some exercise on an afternoon such as this. I'd like to begin by discussing some issues that you've listed among your top priorities should you be elected. Previously, you have said that education is something on which you would focus first off the bat. You've said that Tennessee needs not only more college graduates, but also boosts to its technical schools and apprenticeship programs. On top of these goals, you've also said you'd like to increase teacher pay, right, especially when it comes to rural areas, as well as ways to pursue keeping teachers in those rural areas. What sort of restructuring or new revenue streams would need to happen to be able to pay for some of these advancements?
Well, I think it's a matter of when you're in an administrative position, an executive, you set priorities, and then you do your budget, which will be dictated by your priorities. You know, my experience as mayor in Nashville, I had two very different terms. When I was elected in '07, about 8 months later, the country went into the deepest recession it's known since the Great Depression. And we had to make tough decisions. We had to make budget decisions and decide what was important for the city moving forward. And those were the things you protect, and the things that are less important or less a priority, you don't protect as much. So to me, it was public safety, it was education, it was economic development, and we cut almost every other department 10 to 20%. As governor, I would say to you that my top priority will be education, and the budget would reflect that in how I cut up the pieces of the budgetary pie. And I think that's how you get it done.
But how can we focus, what would you propose to do to focus in rural areas like this one?
Well, I think the critical area that I think in rural areas that I've heard from superintendents all over the state and in smaller communities has been keeping teachers. I often hear that teachers from rural districts are offered $10,000 more in another district within Tennessee and they move, or they're offered more by the state of Georgia or by Alabama and they move. And I think we all agree that to have really good success in the classroom, you've got to have a good teacher, and you want to have a great teacher. And to get that, you have to pay to attract the best, and you want to retain them. Another issue I think is important for rural Tennessee, and it's not an easy issue, and I think we got to be willing to look at the way we're funding schools, is that there are clearly disparities in some school districts in what they get to support education. And a great example of that just is if you look at different districts around the state, some have more access to sales tax than others. I've visited certain school districts where they don't have car dealerships, they don't have malls, people go out of the district to do their shopping, and they have a much more limited opportunity to offer enhancements to their students.
Turning to agriculture, which especially in parts of the state such as this one, it's a very important issue. You've called the tariffs proposed by the Trump administration a grave concern for Tennessee's economy. What would you do as governor to try to lessen the impact of tariffs on Tennessee's farmers and businesses?
Well, hopefully the full magnitude of what could happen if there is a trade war, or we start enacting tariffs and others then enact their own tariffs, does not happen. But what could happen is that you could see the cost of steel and aluminum go up, and that would have an effect on farm equipment. In terms of row crops, which are so important to West Tennessee, obviously I think that would drive prices down because there would be less demand if there were tariffs in response to a tariff we placed. I mean, I think we need to do everything we possibly could in that situation to help farmers through a difficult time. And whether you do more with agricultural enhancement grants look at ways to make sure that farmers have access to capital and have access to insurance. I mean, would all be things that I would look at. But it would be very difficult for them, and I think the state should do what it could to help.
Speaking of those farmers, do you have in mind, soybeans, for instance, would be one of the crops very heavily affected if the tariffs were to go into effect. Do you have in mind what would be a break-even bushel price for farmers of soybeans?
No, I don't, but I would certainly look and be informed as to what needed to be done. I mean, clearly, if there is a trade war affecting agriculture, all of those prices for all crops would have to be studied and examined, and then take whatever action we can take, and hopefully the federal government would be of assistance too.
Speaking of health care, another crucial issue at debate in this election, hospital closures have become a real problem in rural areas of West Tennessee, a situation blamed by some in large part on the state's failure to expand Medicaid. You've long said you supported expansion, but that has been voted down by Tennessee's Republican-dominated state legislature, a party situation that's not likely to change in this year's elections.
It might change some.
But not majority,
Right.
speaking wise. That vote even happened with a Republican governor himself supporting expansion. Given that, is continuing to push for expansion really helping Tennessee?
Well, it certainly is. I mean, if you look at the situation we're in, when the decision was originally made by the legislature not to move forward with Medicaid expansion, the fear was that there would be additional costs from the federal government, or we'd be left holding the bag. And now it's sort of a good thing in sort of an academic surrounding to talk about. We have now the opportunity to look back at a few years to look at what the evidence is. And the evidence is that our state has lost well over $4 billion because of this, that people with disabilities, with low incomes, pre-existing conditions are going uninsured. And as you've mentioned, we've had 10 hospitals closed. So we've seen the negative impact, and so now you can have a debate, a discussion about this issue where you can say this is really what happens when you don't do Medicaid expansion. And it ties into the opioid issue and the lack of treatment and everything else. I think if you elect me governor, that would be a strong message that the voters of Tennessee are interested in seeing that happen. The voters in Maine did it in a referendum. The voters in Virginia made a statement about this, and Virginia is working now to do Medicaid expansion, so it can happen.
But continuing to study how that debate has gone, what else would you propose to do to help alleviate some of those health care concerns that are affecting people now?
Well, I think you have to, the issue around rural medical care, which is a very important issue, because when you talk about rural economic development and 15 out of 21 counties in West Tennessee losing population, having a health care system, having a hospital, and not being 45 minutes away from a hospital is key to economic development, is key to population growth. So I think the state has a role to work with nonprofits, with the for-profit medical community in the state to try to find answers and to try to create partnerships to get it done. Obviously, if there's no chance for Medicaid expansion, then you look for other ways to get our fair share of Medicaid dollars in Tennessee. Right now, we are sending money out and we're getting less back, and that's not where you want to be.
You referenced the opioid crisis,
Right.
Clearly a topic on everyone's minds. What, as governor, would you propose to jumpstart finding a solution?
Well, I think Governor Haslam's proposal that the legislature passed is a good start. I mean, I think he did a good job with that. I think you look at, number one, public education, getting the word out much more extensively than we've done about the dangers of opioids. I think treatment is where we have to do a lot more. I don't think there are sufficient treatment dollars in the state budget. I mean, one of the issues you see in the state is there are not the facilities that we need to offer treatment. I'll give you an example from Nashville. We have a place called Renewal House, a nonprofit. It is the only one in the Nashville area that provides opioid treatment for pregnant women and mothers. There's a 50-person waiting list. We've got to start recognizing those issues and offering more in the form of treatment. Law enforcement clearly has a role. Law enforcement should be empowered to crack down on those who are making a living off the misery of others. I think all of those things need to happen.
You previously talked about your successes in economic development during your time as mayor of Nashville, and there's no doubt that the city grew during your tenure. But growing business and the overall economy is different in rural areas. What specific ideas do you bring to economic development for rural Tennessee, and how does your urban mayoral experience translate in places like this?
Well, I think it translates this way. Number one, I think one of the things that happened in Nashville while I was mayor, where we saw basically 70,000 jobs come in, is that took a lot of people working together to get it done. It took a lot of cooperation. But it also took recognizing that you got to build a strong community. You got to make better quality of life, work on having better schools, work on having a safer city. I mean, at the same time we were doing better during my time as mayor economically, we saw homicides drop to 50-year lows. We were investing, we increased school budgets by 37%. We moved starting teacher pay from 30th to 3rd. I mean, it was a priority for me. And I think those things make a difference. So I think, what I would do is I would say the parts of the state that need the most attention in terms of economic development, those would be the priorities. And then I would work hard with local officials to make sure that we're doing all that we can to build strong local communities economically, healthcare-wise, that's important, and educationally too.
Speaking of building those communities, what specifically do you propose to overcome some of the technological disadvantages in rural areas, including broadband internet, which is incredibly costly to implement?
Yes, I mean, it is costly, and I think there's some good, exciting things going on here at Martin. I was here, I don't know, a few months ago, I guess, to have a tour of the school and talked about broadband in the community. I think you got to put more money into it. I mean, if you look at states that have got it done, and probably the best example is New York State, and everybody thinks of New York as New York City, but it is a big rural state above New York. They put in a substantially more money, and I think that's what needs to be done. Maybe you double what you do, but you can move the process along faster. You can't just throw money at it in terms of just a huge sum, because you won't have the capacity to get the work done like that. But you can move it along if we made a larger investment in it, which I think we need to do. We need to do it soon, because it has a huge role on rural communities in terms of education, in terms of business and community, in terms of emergency services, and also in healthcare. I mean, people talk about making healthcare more technological, access through broadband, but you got to have the broadband first.
Do you think that's something that would necessitate a pilot program in one area or several areas at a time, since it is so costly and would be difficult to do all the way around?
I think we're doing it in the state. I mean, we are, there has been money appropriated in $5–10 million increments, sort of. I think if you do more, it's going to get it done faster. And I think the need is apparent. I think it's vital for West Tennessee and other rural areas of the state to get it done, and I'd like to see it happen faster.
Going back to education for a moment, let's talk about school safety.
Yep.
You've said that you don't support the idea of arming teachers, particularly in rural areas where school resource officers can be scarce. What other ideas do you have for securing schools?
Well, for me, I think the number one thing we need to do is look at more resource officers or being creative. I think the legislature talked about using folks who have retired or bringing other people into the school who are trained to use firearms. My sense from talking to teachers is they do not want to be the ones asked to carry firearms and keep them safe during the school day. And so I think we need to look to make in terms of resource officers, to make sure students are protected. I think there has to be a conversation in this state and in this country about how we keep firearms out of the hands of dangerous people. I support the Second Amendment. I think that, I understand very clearly Tennessee is very much a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. But I think that we can start the discussion, which I don't think has to be terribly partisan, with the premise is we got to find a way to keep dangerous people who are a threat to others, from having firearms, and particularly firearms that can shoot multiple rounds.
Where do you think that starts? With mental health conversations, or
I think
elsewhere?
it talks about background checks from people when they purchase firearms. If someone has an issue that needs to be examined, I think mental health is a huge part of this. I mean, we had a situation in Nashville just recently, the Waffle House incident, where, according to the news reports, the individual who was arrested for that had his firearms taken away in Illinois because he was seen to be mentally unstable, and then they were given back to him. And then he turns up in Nashville, and harming people and killing people.
That wraps up the questions that I had. Now is an opportunity for you to give a closing statement to the audience.
Great. Well, thank you. I enjoyed it. And my name's Karl Dean, and I'm running for governor because I think the state wants a pragmatic, common sense, kind of get-it-done person who's going to focus on the issues that really matter to people. I don't think the state wants to have an extremist or somebody who's overly partisan. You know, when I ran for mayor in Nashville, I ran in a nonpartisan race. I had to get Democrats, Republicans, and independents to support me. And when you do the job of mayor, you don't do it on partisan lines. You don't think about what's the Democrat or Republican way of doing it. You do it on what's going to make the city a better place to live, what's going to create a better future, what's going to be best for the people. And so that's the way I want to approach it. There's a famous old saying that there's no Democrat or Republican way of filling a pothole. People just want you to fill the pothole. And that's what we need. You know, I'm going to focus on public education. I'm going to focus on economic opportunity for all parts of the state, but particularly the parts of the state that need it. And I'm going to focus on health care. I think Tennessee is a beautiful state. It's got a fantastic future. We have so many things going for us, and our best years are still to come. But we just need to take care of the basics. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next candidate will be Tennessee State House of Representatives Minority Leader Craig Fitzhugh. Hey there. Good evening. How are you? You too. Have a seat.
Thank you.
This is for you. I'd like to begin by talking about an issue that you have said on the campaign trail is your top priority, which is health care. Specifically, as a legislative leader, you've pressed for Medicaid expansion, calling the failure to do so the, quote, biggest moral failure of your 23 years in the state legislature. If a Republican governor couldn't get Medicaid expansion through the GOP-controlled legislature, what would you, as a Democratic governor, do to try to make another go at this?
Thanks. Good question, and that's right. I think the most pressing need we have in this state is with our health care system. And the thing that we can do that will affect it the most in the least amount of time with the less cost to our state would be to expand Medicare. And what this means is that people who have jobs but don't have the ability to, through their employer or through their pocketbook to afford insurance, up to 138% of poverty can actually be insured, and it can help us in so many ways. The particular question was if Governor Haslam can't do it, why do I think I can? If I'm elected, I'll be a Democrat, and there will probably be a majority Republican legislature. Well, I'm number one. My wife calls me, she calls me Pollyandy because she says I'm an optimistic type. But I have more than optimism. I have been in the legislature 24 years. I know how the legislature works. I've been in the governor's office hundreds of times, and I know what a governor is supposed to do. I have colleagues that I believe know that my heart is right and that my numbers are right because I've been in the budgetary process for the state for a period of time. I'm convinced that now that the politics are out of the way, and they are for the most part, I think we can get together and with pressure on everybody, including the public coming back to our legislature, I think we can come to a conclusion that will expand Medicaid, even if it's only for 6 months or 2 years, that will put us on the right track for reducing costs for our citizens who can't afford health care. I am a firm believer that this can be done. It will be my first priority to do that, to do whatever means I can and we can as a Tennessee General Assembly and as a governor to do this. I'm very optimistic about that opportunity.
And optimism is a great thing and carries us very far, but what if it becomes apparent at some point during that journey the Medicaid expansion isn't going to happen? What else would you propose to improve health care?
Well, I think there's a lot of things we can do. I just read today a program that Virginia has asked for a waiver. A lot of these have to do with federal waivers that you have to go in and ask for. And this one has to do with the opioid crisis. They've got an acronym name, AEX or something like that. I didn't get to read it close enough, but they went in and expanded their ability to pay for opioid prevention drugs and opioid drugs that bring people out of these dangerous situations, and have been able to save a lot of lives, number one, and already saved money, number two. So we have to be creative when we go in to ask the federal government for these waivers. We have to make sure that we pay providers right. We have to make sure that our program is not any broader than we can financially make it to be, and we have to expand Medicaid because we get a 9 or 10 to 1 match for that particular population over the 2 to 1 match that we have in regular Medicaid or regular TennCare.
Moving to agriculture,
Yes.
Clearly a big topic in
Yes.
areas of the state such as this one. You helped create the Tennessee Agriculture Enhancement Program.
I was a primary sponsor when it started, yes.
Right, which provides cost-share funds for long-term investments on farms with livestock or crops. What do you see as some successes of this program thus far, and what have been some of its struggles?
Well, it's not been certainly a savior by any means. Remember, this program was because of the tobacco settlement, where we had thought that the monies were going to farmers, especially tobacco farmers and others that lost their crop because of the changes in the law. But it didn't happen that way. The legislature, through its sometimes not so infinite wisdom, put the money in the general fund because we had some budgetary shortages at the time. However, we started the Agricultural Enhancement Fund to allow farmers in the beef business to build a certain stocking mechanisms and gates and that type of thing to help them with their product. Those in the beef feeding business to have sheds where they could put the hay and the food for the livestock. Those in the business of row crops to put fences up, to put sheds and that type of thing, which took a little pressure off the cost of farming. Because of the cost of fertilizers, because of the risk that they take, it just continues to escalate. And then, as you well know, as we well know here in West Tennessee, we don't have much control over the market, nor tariffs for that matter. So we have to give every break we can at the state level and at the federal level to make sure that that farming continues to be our number one industry, which it is, Mr. Commissioner. Thank you for that.
Speaking of tariffs, what's your take on the Trump administration's proposed tariffs, and what would you do specifically to lessen their impact? Expanding on some of the things.
Yes. Well, you know, I'm sort of a free market guy, and I don't think tariffs will really work. But that's sort of, you know, beyond my raising a little bit, and we don't have the ability to do much about it. I mean, that's at the federal government. I think at the state level, we can make sure that what we do at the state level promotes farming, promotes new crops. It promotes the ability to, through science and technology, to give better crops to our farmers. Maybe some credits that can help in the short term while these tariffs are being, are being meted and until they get balanced out. Even some new crops. I mean, Tennessee is moving toward I think the legalization of medical marijuana. So there may be, with good regulation, with taxes, and with the ability to control this type of thing, there may be some crops that our farmers can use and start that we haven't had in the past.
Speaking of crops already very crucial to Tennessee's farm economy, soybeans are among those that
Right.
would likely be most affected. What would be, in your mind, a break-even bushel price for farmers of soybeans if the tariffs were to go into effect?
Well, I've been in, when I was in high school and college, I worked down at the granary on the river, and we had $6 beans, and that was a long time ago. And not too long ago, we still had $6 beans. Then they popped up pretty good, Andy. I got up, $10, $12, $13, and I thought that was pretty good. But I think if we can get those double-digit beans, that farmers will be able to make it. But I'm certainly not an expert on that. All I know is our yields have saved us many times, and they are tremendous. the amount of yields that not only our corn, but our cotton and our not only our soybeans, but our corn and our cotton as well. So if we can't make it, we bankers don't make it up on volume much, but maybe farmers can.
Returning to a bit of a healthcare conversation for just a moment. As governor, what would you propose to do to combat the ongoing opioid crisis?
Well, I think we've got to start. We're behind in this. I've been to a couple of seminars, 50 miles from home, which makes me an expert. No, it really doesn't. But I've been to some, and other states have, on a bipartisan basis, done a lot more than we have. But I think it is a bipartisan issue. Now, I'll give the governor credit for what he did this time. We passed a pretty broad, I call it the Mississippi River Plan, because, the Mississippi around here is pretty wide. So it's a wide plan. It covers a lot of different areas. It covers, the ability to take the dangerous fake stuff off the market. It talks to the providers. It talks about the drug companies. It talks about education, and it talks about treatment. So those are the things that we need to do. The problem is, it's sort of like the Rio Grande in the middle of summer. It's very, very shallow. There's not a whole lot of depth to it. And the reason is, we only committed $30 million is a lot of money, but in the scheme of things, it's not much for the amount of lives that we lose with opioids. There are some hospitals in this country that commit $30 million a year to this problem. So we've got to do better. Money doesn't cure everything, but I think we have to be more serious about putting the resources necessary to stop this thing and stop it fast. So, but we have a start, and we need to continue that.
Putting on your legislator hat for a moment, where do some of the funding streams for something that's very cash-rich like that we need a lot of money for, where does that come from?
Well, we have a retail-driven economy in our state. Cars and trucks have been keeping us going. We need to keep that going. We need to make sure our roads are good so that we can drive those things. We need to spur our economic development from a retail situation in small towns like the ones I live in, and in Nashville and Memphis and Chattanooga and Jackson and all the metropolitan areas. We just have to keep the economy churning. The good thing about it is, the Lord's put us in a pretty nice place. I mean, Tennessee is a long, narrow state that covers 8 states around us. We could be and should be the hub of the South. And we have a lot of growth. We have a lot of ability to use the tax revenue streams that we have available. There are not many of them. We've done away with some of them, and that's fine. But we can do probably better than we're doing when we're 50th in state and local taxes. One thing I will say about what we can do is try to get this internet situation straightened out, where there are taxes now that people should be paying, and they're not, because we're not able to capture them in Tennessee. Hopefully the Congress will take care of that, or at least we're trying to, or have been trying to, at the state government to capture that, so people who should be paying taxes on items that they bought and delivered in Tennessee should. And that should keep us from having any type of broad-based tax increase for the foreseeable future.
Continuing in the vein of the economy,
okay.
Unemployment in general is
Yes.
down in West Tennessee. But as you know, 8 of the 10 Tennessee counties with the highest unemployment rate, according to recently reduced numbers, are right here in West Tennessee. You've previously pointed out that more people in Tennessee work for minimum wage than any other state in the country. What would you propose as governor both to reduce unemployment and underemployment, particularly in rural areas?
Well, you can make your unemployment figures whatever you want them to be. It depends on who's on those rolls and who gets counted. So we all live here in West Tennessee, and we know our employment. There's a lot more that we could do as far as getting people employed, and we have to work on our wages from not just a West Tennessee perspective, but from a statewide perspective. But the actual key is education, which is really my number one concern, number one issue. The healthcare is the most critical we have right now, but it's all about training. It's all about having workers that know how to do a job, and we need to do a better job, and we are doing a better job through our TCATs, through our community colleges, through our 4-year colleges, through apprenticeships, through job training programs. Everybody, it appears to me, needs a secondary education, but everybody, it also appears to me, needs some type of post-secondary. 4-year, 2-year training. And I think that's the best way we can keep our economy going and get folks good jobs. And a good job, it turns over to another good job. I say, we all do better when we all do better. If all of us can do better at one level, all of us at all levels do better.
Well, again, drilling down into education, previously, in a previous forum, you said you would support finding ways to reward deserving teachers. You also said you wanted to focus on literacy, but still be realistic about the state's education budget. Again, trying to drill down, how would you propose to find the funding to keep and reward those teachers, particularly in rural areas where it can be harder to find and recruit?
Well, that's a question that fortunately I've been involved with for most of the 24 years I've been in the legislature. When I was chairman of finance, I handled Governor Bredson's budget, and my speaker has allowed me to stay on finance, both the subcommittee and the full committee. So, I'm sort of weird because I like budgets, and I think we can do a better job with our budget. And the good thing about the education, to me, it's the most important thing we do, so that ought to be our priority. It ought to be our top priority. And then some things may have to get squeezed around, or we take a different look at them, something like that. But I think it is critical that we pay our teachers more. And we don't have to pay them all in one lump sum, but we just need to be building upon that, just building every year incrementally. And sooner or later, you look around and our teachers are making a wage or a salary or a income that really follows the importance of that profession.
Are there new revenue streams we would need to pursue to really fund teachers adequately?
Well, I think I mentioned the internet thing. I think it's finally getting closer. We've been at this for 10 years, and I think it could be as much as $700 billion when we get it fully inflated. And if you have $1 billion tax, not a tax, but a revenue increase, you can do a lot with that.
That wraps up the questions that I had. I'd like to give you an opportunity to give a closing statement to our listeners.
Well, thank you you followed me a little bit there. You had some good questions.
I did my homework.
Oh my goodness, yes.
If I'm going to appear at a university, I need to do my homework.
Well,
right?
you did. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, I know many of you in this audience. I'm the only candidate in this race from West Tennessee. I'm the only candidate that's not a multimillionaire, so that's two things. And I'm only candidate that's an Eagle Scout. So those are the three things I got going. And I'm also the only candidate that had Tina Turner as a babysitter. So those are the. But why am I doing this after 24 years in the legislature? Look, I've had a great life, a good career. I'm a public school person. My wife, my daughter, my only sister-in-law are teachers. I went through all the way through public schools, including my university that's Orange, but it's at the other end of the state. And my wife and I were the first people in our family to have a college degree, and now we've got 11 in our family, which is just amazing. I got so much to be thankful for. I've been able to go in the Air Force and serve there. I've been able to practice law in a small firm with a tremendous lawyer where I learned so much about more than just the law. And I've been able to be in a good, solid small business that I've been in for the last 26 years now, and it's still viable. So, and then I've had a career in public service that was the highlight of my professional life. So that's the reason I want to run for governor. I look at my 4 grandchildren, almost 5 now. There's another one on the way. And I think, they'll probably be doing okay. But what about other children? What about the children that I read to yesterday down in Ripley Primary School? Oh my goodness, their faces were bright and they were just eager to learn. But are they going to have the opportunity that my kids had? And I say, I got a little life left in me, and I just want to put it out there. And I'm ready to lead the state. I think I can, if I may, I want to talk about one of my mentors, Ned McWhirter. He's had 4 vanilla wafers and a cup of coffee. I think I can do it with 2 vanilla wafers and a cup of coffee. I am ready to serve this state for as long as I can, and it's the honor of my life to travel across this long, narrow state and talk to people about it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Thank you. Our next candidate will be former Commissioner of Tennessee Economic and Community Development, Randy Boyd. How are you? Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you.
There you go.
It's kind of quiet. I was hoping we'd have walk-up music.
A soundtrack would be nice.
Yeah.
Well, let's get started. In a forum earlier this year, you said you wanted Tennessee to become the state of opportunity for everyone. Can you please expand on that with some specific examples of what it means and how you plan to implement that, particularly in rural areas?
Yeah, so the goal is, the mission is to make Tennessee the state of opportunity. Opportunity for better education, opportunity for better jobs, and opportunity for everyone. On the opportunity for everyone, it's specifically talking about our rural communities. When I was Commissioner of Economic and Community Development, I traveled to all 95 counties, and you really quickly realize that we're a state of haves and have-nots. In fact, 21 of our 95 counties at that time were in the bottom 10% in the entire United States in poverty, income, and unemployment. So we set a goal to have 0 distressed counties by the year 2025. We put together a team of 120 people. I was one of the co-chairmen. Commissioner Jay Templeton from Agriculture was another. Commissioner Triplett from Tourism was another. But we had 120 people focusing on how we do this. 6 big things. One is about education. Everything starts with education. If you don't have a trained workforce, a community is not going to prosper. Second, we've got to have industrial sites, like the one that we invested in Gibson County that brought Tyson. We also have to have broadband. We have to have the infrastructure to be able to access the world. Fourth, we have to have entrepreneurs, people like Williams Sausage and so many of these other smaller companies all across our state that are really the backbone of those small communities. And it's also always about agriculture, and it's also about tourism. So those are the key strategies.
It's a combination of things.
Yes.
Clearly, speaking of development sites, there is one, the mega site, into which tens of millions of dollars have already been put, and tens of millions of dollars will need to be put for it to be viable and shovel-ready for the next governor. And that's according to our current governor. It's not according to me. In your opinion, where is the point at which, or is there one, at which you say this is a viable project, or we're going to have to reconfigure ourselves?
No, it's a viable project today. So a couple of things that are really important, and I'm sorry if I maybe made a face when you said, is it shovel-ready? Because that's a term that people use, I think, sometimes with a little lack of definition. So first off, when
again, that's not my term.
I know. Governor Alexander managed to, when he was a governor, managed to bring Nissan to Middle Tennessee with raw farmland. There was not a road, there wasn't any infrastructure, there was nothing done on the site. But he managed to bring one of the largest companies to Tennessee in our history on farmland without anything being developed. This site that we have at the mega site is so far beyond that. We have a site that is ready to sell now. We've got $140 million invested. The governor approved another $40 million this year. After that, there's maybe another $30 million. We need to finish the site. So as governor, 2 things. One, whatever is left to do, we'll go ahead and finish the site, because the more the site is finished, the easier it is to sell. But it's ready to sell now. We have companies that were looking at it a couple years ago. They're looking at it now. We can land a company there. And when we do, we will transform West Tennessee. We will be able to, if you populate it with 5 major OEMs, which we've done the studies on, we can create 11,000 direct jobs, 14,000 indirect jobs, and 10,000 induced jobs, close to 35,000 jobs, and $7 billion in annual economic impact. It's the thing that's going to catapult West Tennessee to the top, and I'm determined to make that happen.
So those are your plans for the mega site, but what about future projects? Would it perhaps be advised, in your opinion, to have a little bit lower threshold for another potential site to be developed? And I don't mean threshold in terms of quality, just in terms of how much money needs to be invested before something can actually move in.
So you're saying about investing in other sites besides the mega site?
Right,
yes.
Looking down the road of future plans.
Well, no, we need to continue to do that. When I mentioned the Governor's Rural Task Force, we had 6 major strategies. The second one was investing in sites. One of the things that you learn as Commissioner of Economic Development, companies don't come to places, to counties that don't have sites. You know, I wish it was different. I wish people would go to a community and say, this is a beautiful place. If you'll build us a site, we might come. It doesn't work that way. You start off with the sites. And so we've got to make sure that our rural communities that sometimes don't have the resources to develop their sites, have those sites developed. And so as the governor, as the state, we're going to continue to invest in sites like we did in Gibson County. Gibson County won 2 sites through the Rural Economic Opportunity Act, an act that was a result of our Rural Task Force. 2 different $500,000 grants. As a result of that, they were able to recruit the largest company in Gibson's history, Tyson, with over 1,200 jobs to the county. We need to continue to do all across the state. I'll mention one other. I was just in Lake County today, one of our distressed counties across the state. Lake County has a site called the Port of Kate's Landing. It's needing rail. As governor, first priority, we're going to finish the rail so that site is ready to be occupied.
Switching to agriculture for a moment, you've previously said you would want to continue the Tennessee Agriculture Enhancement Program, which provides cost-share funds for long-term investment on farms with livestock or crops. What do you see as some successes of this program so far, and what have been some of its struggles?
Yeah, so the Agricultural Enhancement Fund has been essential, and I talk to farmers all across the state, and every single one of them, the first thing they say is, we've got to continue it. It supports so many different projects. It's something that we've got to continue. But in addition to that, with the Commissioner of Agriculture and the Rural Task Force, we also created an additional fund called the Ag Innovation Fund, where we're able to provide an additional $1 million to be able to support other innovative projects for agriculture. I want to say one last thing with regards to how we support agriculture. You know, when I was commissioner, we had something called the Fast Track Fund, and we used that money to be able to provide training for people and a public infrastructure for people to create company or locate companies here in Tennessee. One of the best examples we had was bringing Devil Eye Mustard to Dyer County. When we did that, not only did we bring 200 jobs, but we brought a company that actually started sourcing all their mustard seed in Northwest Tennessee. So one of the things I'd like to do as governor is create a new fund called the Farm Track Fund, which will work similarly, except that it's going to target processors like Devil Eye Mustard, like Tyson. So not only do you get the jobs and the investment from the company, but you get a company that's actually then going to start sourcing all their materials from the local farmers.
Speaking of materials and farmers and their crops, what are your thoughts on the proposed tariffs that the Trump administration has put forward?
Well, so one, I want to say I support our president, and he's got to look after what's in the best interest of the entire United States. But as governor, I'm here to represent Tennessee. And so I can tell you that the tariffs, as proposed now, aren't good for Tennessee. For our steel manufacturers, I was with a company in Paris yesterday that makes steel products, and they stamp steel metal products. Their cost of goods and steel, just on speculation, has already gone up 25%. It's going to put them at a big disadvantage. There's 300 jobs in Paris that depend on this particular company. So it's hard. It's going to be difficult for Tennessee companies. In addition, as retaliation, we're talking about significant tariffs on soybeans. I was with a farmer the other day that said he was going to lose 3 out of every 4 bushels that he was going to sell because of these tariffs. And so my job as governor is to advocate for Tennesseans. So I will go to the president and say, this is going to hurt us. Now, in the end of the day, he's going to make the decision for what's best for the United States, but I just got to make sure that Tennesseans' voices are heard. And we're going to be fighting for Tennessee farmers and Tennessee workers.
Speaking of soybeans, what would be a break-even bushel price for farmers of that crop if these tariffs were to happen?
Well, so I don't know the break-even price for bushels of soybeans. If you want to know the break-even price for a bar control collar, I can probably share that with you, but not for soybeans. I think that the most important thing is we just got to make sure that we're supporting our farmers with the Ag Enhancement Funds, with the Ag Innovation Funds, and making sure that we're giving them all the support that we can.
During a forum in January, switching for a moment, you voiced support for the federal government to give states block grants to run health care programs through whatever plans are passed by Congress. You said then it's not productive to make speculative state-level plans until that's at the federal level. In the interim, though, hospitals continue to close in rural areas, including here in West Tennessee, a situation blamed in part by some on the state's failure to expand Medicaid. That's a proposal that your former boss, Governor Haslam, supported. As governor, What would you propose to turn problems in rural healthcare around?
So I think there's three things. So first off, I think if you look at each of these 10 hospitals that have closed, it's a lot more complicated than that. Many of them had other issues, but I do want to try to get a block grant for the state of Tennessee. I know I hear others talk often about wanting to, all the money that we've lost by not expanding. It's kind of like me saying, well, gosh, I wish I'd invested in Amazon 10 years ago. Look at all the money I didn't make. That's past, that we don't have that opportunity. What's before us is the opportunity for a block grant. The federal government has said they're open to considering that. So as governor, on day one or day two, we're going to be in Washington asking for a block grant, and then try to get as much money as we can for the state of Tennessee, hopefully equal to the amount of money that we would have possibly gotten with Insure Tennessee. But the advantage to a block grant is that Tennesseans get to make decisions for Tennesseans. And I'm convinced that if Tennesseans get to make decisions for Tennesseans, we can make better decisions and have broader coverage. I think this conversation leaves out two really key points that we need to make sure that we're always putting at the table. The first is we've just got to be healthier. The state of Tennessee is 6th in the country in smoking, 8th in the country in obesity. We're #1 in the country in teenage obesity. We're at 42nd in the country in income. We can't afford the health we have. We've got to be healthier. In our company, we put together some health programs that actually reduced last year our claims went down by 19%. So it can be done, and most Tennesseans are now working. They're in school. We have places where we can access them. So we need to focus on better health, and then secondly, we need to make sure that we're also having a more efficient system. Everybody wants to talk about getting more money to pay for this service or product, but we never talk about how we pay for or pay less for it. And the quick example is we just need to have a better marketplace. We have a marketplace in healthcare, as all of you know. I know I don't have too much time to go through the long example, but I'll just say this. Ask yourself when the last time it was that when you went for some type of medical service and you asked for the price. And then when did the doctor actually give you the price? Imagine a marketplace in which nobody ever asks the price and the sellers don't even know the price. It's inefficient. There's an opportunity to create more accountability and transparency and consumerism in the healthcare system.
Not just paying for health care itself, but just being healthy is expensive. Eating well, taking good care of yourself. Would you, going back to what you said a moment ago, would you try to incentivize businesses to somehow encourage their employees to adopt a healthier lifestyle?
I'd be open to looking at it from the state level, but the fact is, as a business, we're incentivized already. You know, for my company, having healthier employees reduces my healthcare costs. They show up for work more often, and they're more productive. So I think about making sure that companies understand the advantage that they have in having a healthier workforce.
Sure, and as in your business, you are the head of your business. As governor, you would be head of the state. So in theory, as the state's chief executive, perhaps you could find a way or would want to try to encourage other businesses to think that way.
Yeah, so one of the things that I'll have the advantage of as the governor is I'll have 42,000 employees as opposed to only 730 in my company. One of the things we do at our company is have health savings accounts. And most of you probably know how those work, but we changed the deductible from $500 to $5,000, but give each employee a $4,500 allowance in their health savings account. The money they don't spend, they get to keep, which makes them smarter consumers of health care. Now, it's an option in the state. I'd like to encourage more people in the state to be able to do that. And by doing so, as one of the largest employers in the state, we can create more consumerism just through our own employees.
Let's finish by talking about education. In a forum in January, you said you wanted to make big, bold improvements in the state's education system. Can you please give some specifics on what that looks like?
I know with limited time, I'll just pick the most important one. One of the things that drives me to run for governor was completing the Drive to 55. In 2013, I was able to author something called the Drive to 55, a vision that would take the state from 32% of our population with something beyond high school to 55% by the year 2025. If we achieve this, Tennesseans will make $9 billion more a year in annual income. If we keep taxes the same, we'll make $700 million more at the state. So it means a lot for not just for education, but for incomes for Tennesseans. If you look at where we're at today and where we need to go, the biggest gap that we have is in the trade skills, things that we teach at our community colleges and our technical colleges. 60% of the people that are the jobs that we need to fill are welders, mechatronics, those job-ready skills that we used to teach. As governor, one of the things I want to do is work with our community colleges and our technical colleges to bring more of those programs to the high schools. Imagine a technical college campus on the high school, so that kids could actually graduate from high school, not just with a high school diploma, but also with a certificate in some job-ready skill. Again, I was in Lake County this morning. Lake County, the post-secondary attainment level is 8%. Companies are looking for 55%. It's a challenge for them because companies see this. If we don't get the workforce right, it's going to be hard to get the economy right. And so it's critical for our state to make these investments.
Thank you very much. Those are the questions I have. Now you have an opportunity to give a closing statement if you'd like.
Thank you. So I'm Randy Boyd, running for governor. I'm a 7th-generation Tennessean. The first 6 generations are from West Tennessee. The first 3 were from Crockett County, and the last 3 from a little town of Kenton, home of the... Thank you. You always know you're West Tennessee when they can finish that sentence. So we've got a lot of deep roots in West Tennessee, and I think over the last 20, 30 years, West Tennessee has been overlooked and left behind. As governor, I want to make sure that we're giving the right attention back to West Tennessee. I'm not a professional politician. I'm a businessman, a Christian, a conservative, and I want to focus on 3 big things, which we touched on. I want to make Tennessee the state of opportunity. Opportunity for better education. And opportunity for better education means completing the stride to 55, making sure that every kid goes to school and gets the certificates or the skills they need to get a great job. So it's about kindergarten to a job, or K to J. The second thing is about opportunity for better jobs. The most important thing that we can do is actually give them the skills to be able to create the workforce that's going to attract those businesses. If we do that, that's the best thing we could do to continue to bring jobs to our state. But I also want to make sure, specifically in the West, that we're continuing to invest in our infrastructure. We want to make sure that we finish the mega site. We want to finish the Port of Kate's Landing. We want to finish I-69. Those will be top priorities in year 1 as governor. We also got to make sure that we build out our broadband. When I was commissioner, we were able to create a new policy that allowed rural electric co-ops to be able to offer broadband, and Gibson Electric is pioneering that throughout Northwest Tennessee. We need to help provide them the funds to do it. And then finally, opportunity for everyone. We want to make sure everyone has the opportunity to succeed, regardless of where you're at. And I'm going to be focusing on our rural communities, and those are my top 3 priorities, but I can't accomplish any of them if I don't have the opportunity to be your governor. So I'd appreciate your support, and I'd appreciate your vote. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next candidate is Speaker of the Tennessee State House of Representatives, Beth Harwell. Good to see you. Congratulations. Oh, thank you. Here you go. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. You have been a longtime educator, and you have said education is a top priority for you both personally and in your campaign. Please expand on why you feel this issue is of paramount importance and what proposals you have to build on successes in Tennessee's education system.
Well, we have come a long way in the state of Tennessee when it comes to education. I will say, let me preface all my remarks by saying the most important thing the next governor will do is keep our financial house in order. We sometimes take for granted as Tennesseans, but we shouldn't, that we balance our budget every year, that we are the 3rd lowest tax state in the nation, and the best gift that we give to your children and grandchildren is that we are the lowest debt state in the nation. And when you have your financial house in order, it allows you to do other great things. And one of the things that we have prioritized is just that, education. We have poured more money into education, and money is not always the solution, but we do want to pay our teachers well and treat them with the respect that they deserve. We have put high standards in place in the state of Tennessee. We don't always have our accountability system quite where it needs to be, and we are still working on that. But it would be my focus as the next governor to make sure that we prioritize education, because it is the top priority we have. It's actually constitutionally required of us that we provide free public education for our citizens, and that education system is funded well and funded to the point where we can have absolutely the best result that we can. We are headed in the right direction. We have some of the fastest improving test scores in both math and science of any state in the nation, but we're not quite where we need to be when it comes to reading. So it would be my focus to really prioritize literacy for the next generation.
Speaking of testing, this year there have been some problems with the Tennessee Ready, with some areas unable to use results following widespread technical issues. In a previous interview with the Greenville paper, you said you had heard from parents complaining that students were being tested too much, sometimes too often. How important really do you feel testing is specifically, and are there changes that need to be made to make sure that the tests our students do take are useful?
Absolutely. You know, teachers want to be held accountable, and they want these tests to be meaningful to them and useful to them. And right now we don't have the system down right. I'll be the first to admit that. And I think Representative Holt would agree with me on that. We, as a legislature, we decided that we were not going to hold teachers accountable this year for the test results, nor students, nor our schools, because we just didn't have the system down right. We'll continue to work on it. But I will tell you that it's important that, you know, I come out of the academic world. I was a teacher. And I'll tell you, in all the years that I taught, I have never had a student come back to me and say, oh, you know what, Dr. Harwell was what I was when at the college level. I really loved that test you gave me. That made all the difference for me. Never. I do have them come back to me and say, I remember the lecture you gave on X, or I remember the class project we did on this. So teachers understand that testing is just a necessary evil that you have to go through, but it's not the criteria of why they want to be teachers. They want to be teachers because they want to instill a love of learning to the next generation. And I think we have excellent teachers. I believe in our public school system, but we have to get the testing down right.
Let's talk about agriculture, one of the top drivers of Tennessee's economy. In a September forum, you said you supported the expansion of allowing small farmers to sell their produce at the local level. Can you please talk a little bit about how this helps Tennessee farmers and expand on it a bit?
Right. You know, agriculture is such a huge part. It's a foundation of our economy here in the state of Tennessee. There's a reason why when you look at the state seal of Tennessee, that agriculture is prominent. It was $3.6 billion in crops and livestock last year alone. So it's a huge part of our economy, and I want to be very supportive. We have restored some of the agricultural enhancement grants that we let go a couple years back. We restored those. I want to continue that going forward. And I'm very proud of the fact that we now have programs that are agriculture tourism. And so, in other words, people want Tennessee products. Again, I understand, Nashville, an urban area of our state, but I'm surprised how many people want to buy products that are produced and grown right here in Tennessee. And so I would continue to move that forward.
What are your thoughts on the Trump administration's tariff proposals, which would have significant effects on farmers?
You know, I support President Trump. He's our president. I want to see him successful because when he's successful, our nation will be successful. I pray for him. I believe that he is putting America first, and I think that there are good things that will come out of that. I know in just my job as speaker, just the few times that I have actually gone out and recruited industry to come to our state, it's amazing how many international companies now want a presence in the United States because they know that Trump is serious about, he's going to put America first. Now, I will have to tell you with the tariffs, I'll be honest with you, I'm gravely concerned. Very few Tennesseans realize, but we are the #1 exporter of medical devices to China. We know how important the soybean products are, and again, we're one of the highest producers of soybean that is exported to China. So to be honest with you, I'm gravely concerned about these tariffs. But I trust the president that he has a long-term plan of how this is going to help our nation. But again, I am concerned.
You touched on soybeans. In your mind, have you thought about what a break-even bushel price would be if these tariffs went into effect? That's something on every farmer's mind.
And I can understand why, and I will have to tell you that I would have to rely on experts in the field. I'm not a farmer. I appreciate farmers. My grandfather was a farmer, and I would have to rely on them as to what that price would be.
Moving to health care, another issue on very many people's minds. Hospital closures have become a real problem in rural areas of West Tennessee, a situation that some have blamed in part on the state's failure to expand Medicaid. In January, when asked about Medicaid expansion, you noted that TennCare had already had to shrink by 170,000 enrollees to control costs, saying the state's hands are tied until the federal government takes action. What do you propose to strengthen health care, particularly in rural areas that are coping with those hospital closures?
Absolutely, and I know it is a tragedy for rural areas, but please keep in mind this. We kind of blame it on we didn't expand Medicaid. But the bottom line is those states that did expand Medicaid, their rural hospitals are closing too. Our neighbor Kentucky just closed 5 rural hospitals. So it was not a question of expanding. What the issue really is how we are delivering health care in the United States. The model has failed. It's over now. And so what you really see a lot of going toward in the future is you might have a rural hospital close. We've had 9 here in Tennessee, but 5 of them have reopened, and they've reopened in the terms of being a medical center. And so it's more of an emergency room, and what we do have is they are still providing care. And I would be very supportive of reinventing how we are providing health care to our rural areas. And I'm very proud of the fact that we are headed in the right direction in that. I know it's difficult when you have a rural hospital that closes because it employs people, but they are reopening as medical centers. And you know, the bottom line is people don't check into a hospital for long-term care anymore. Most people go to a facility for outpatient services, and that's going to be the wave of the future coming up.
When asked about combating the opioid crisis, you previously told the Jackson Sun that public funding should be diverted from incarceration toward recovery courts and facilities. In the legislature, clearly also opioids is an issue you've worked on, creating a panel to study the problem. As governor, what else would you propose specifically to combat this ongoing problem that has an effect on so many parts of this state?
Well, we do have a crisis here in this state, but it's not unique to this state. It exists throughout the United States. In the state of Tennessee, we had 333 pain clinics. We now have 175. So the Tennessee General Assembly has really cracked down on these pain clinics to keep it under control. But we passed legislation this year, and I did create a task force. We traveled the entire state from Upper East Tennessee to rural West Tennessee and listened and learned about what the problem really was from experts and people who were impacted by this crisis. And what we decided was that there really is a 3-prong approach. Number 1 is prevention. So this past legislative session, we passed legislation that would limit the number of opioids that can be prescribed to what is known as opioid naive people. That's people that have never been prescribed opioids before. We've limited those to 5 days. Because really the studies seem to indicate after the 6th day of opioid prescriptions, it really does alter the brain of the people that are taking the drugs. That's number 1. We've limited the number of prescriptions, and I think that is critical. We have set up take-back days where you can come back with prescription drugs and give them back if you're not using them. I was shocked at the amount of unused prescription drugs that are out there in our society. So I think the legislature took the right step by limiting the number of prescriptions of opioids that can be given out in any one time. The second thing we did is we really looked at educating the public. And so our current Miss Tennessee, a beautiful young lady, is going to be our spokesperson about how dangerous opioid use is. And then third, law enforcement. And so we have upped the penalty for using illegal drugs like fentanyl and some others. And we have increased the number of TBI agents. We have 5 more assigned to Upper East Tennessee, and we have 5 more TBI agents assigned here in rural West Tennessee to keep illegal drugs from coming into our state.
You have said previously that your extensive legislative experience keeping the state's fiscal house in order would give you the ability to hit the ground running on day one as governor. Please talk about how particularly your experience pertains to being able to recruit and retain businesses in rural areas like right here in West Tennessee.
Right. And you know, I did, my chief of staff, I asked him, who is a UT Martin graduate, I might add, I asked him to go back and look at the grants that had been given from the state over the last 6 years. And I was actually kind of surprised to find out that rural West Tennessee hasn't always received your fair share. And I would change that as governor. I think it's critical. I know that, you know, there's a beauty in living in a rural area. I actually was speaking to a man earlier at the reception who said to me, I wouldn't live in Nashville if you paid me. And I thought, you know what, I get it, because I live there and the congestion of the traffic is horrible. The price of real estate is sky high. You can't afford to have a lot of land. There is something to be said about living in rural Tennessee. And you have a beauty here, and you have so many assets to use. And what you need to do going forward is prepare your workforce, because you can't recruit industry to an area unless you have the workforce. And I'm committed to doing that. Education is my background. I believe in our Tennessee technical schools. I think they're doing a great job, and that would be my emphasis going forward.
In terms of increasing perhaps vocational and technical training, are there other revenue streams or funding sources that would need to be explored were that to be a big expansion?
You know, I think what our tech schools need, and I know that from, I serve on the board of a tech school in Davidson County, and one of our biggest needs is equipment. You know, to have a good tech school, you have to have the right equipment to train the next workforce. And I'm very proud of the fact that President Trump has put a real emphasis on apprenticeship programs. And you know, having 3 kids myself that are now all employed, they really needed that opportunity to have an internship or apprenticeship to learn the skills. And so going forward, that would be a real emphasis for me.
That wraps up the questions that I had. I'd like to offer you an opportunity to make a closing statement to our audience.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I'm honored to be here tonight. It's good to be on the campus. I really appreciate WestStar. You are the oldest and largest leadership program. And it's my honor as Speaker of the House to greet you almost every year and have an opportunity to talk to you. And I would continue to do that. I appreciate what you stand for. I have to tell you that I grew up in a rural part of Pennsylvania. And lest you grow concerned, I want you to know that my mama was born and raised in North Carolina, so I have good Southern blood in me, okay? And actually, my dad grew up on a farm in Pennsylvania, and he became a minor league baseball player, and he traveled all across the nation, and he met my mother doing just that. And they married, and they were married for 72 years. Isn't that amazing? And I was the youngest of 5 children. I was born and raised in a Church of Christ home, and my parents wanted me to go to a Christian school. And the nearest one was David Lipscomb University in Nashville, Tennessee. So I skipped my senior year in high school and came to Lipscomb and Nashville at the age of 16, and I fell in love with Tennessee, and it has been home ever since. I married Sam Harwell, who is a 7th generation Tennessean. He was born and raised in, his family's from Giles County. And we have 3 children. Allie, my oldest, works in Knoxville in an engineering firm there. She's a geologist. My second son just graduated from University of Alabama. Can I say that? Just this past weekend. And then my baby is graduating from high school this year and going off to college soon. So that's my family. I will tell you that, again, I went to Church of Christ College. I ended up teaching at Belmont University, which is a Baptist college there in Nashville. Let me see if I've got this right. I went to Church of Christ College, I taught at a Baptist, and I married a Presbyterian. I think I've got all my bases covered. What do you think? And but we are blessed. Sam is a small business owner in Nashville. And I will end by telling you this little story about my husband. I was getting ready to go speak to a group one morning, and I rather haughtily looked back at my husband, who was at the breakfast table, and I said, Sam, if there's something I, the Speaker of the House, could do for you, a small business owner, what would it be? And he rather quickly threw up his hand and said, leave me alone. You know, if you do something for me, it's another piece of paperwork I have to fill out. If you do something against me, it's a tax or fee I have to pay. And so I'm very proud in the state of Tennessee of 3 things that I think have guided me as a leader in the State House. Number 1, I keep the size of government small. Again, we have limited government in the state of Tennessee. We balance our budget. And I will tell you the thing that I think I'm most proud of as Speaker is when I came in, I really, really wanted to do away with the inheritance tax. And I called Governor Haslam, who was new governor, I was new Speaker, and I asked him for his help. And he said, you know, I just don't think I can do that because I'm a very wealthy man, and it would look like I was doing it for myself. And I said, fine, Governor, we're going to do it without you. And my state house, I'm very proud of them, we eliminated the inheritance tax, we did away with the gift tax, and in 2 more years, we'll be completely rid of the hall income tax. And I am proud of the fact that we are the 3rd lowest tax state in the nation, and I will maintain that as your governor. And secondly, I will tell you that I'm very proud of the fact that we are a very pro-business state. You know, it's not the role of government to create jobs. That's not our role. Our job is to create an environment that's conducive to the private sector creating jobs. And so when I came in, we reformed our unemployment and worker compensation laws. The treasurer came to me at the time and said, Beth, if we do not reform our pension program, we're going to wake up with a mess on our hands. We bit the political bullet, we reformed our pension program, and we are one of 5 states in the nation that fully funds its pension program. I'm very proud of that. And this past October, the Governor Haslam couldn't attend the bond hearings in New York City, so he asked me if I would fill in for him, and I will tell you, I was nervous. I prepared so hard, that little twist in your stomach when you have to make a presentation, that's how I felt. But you know, about 30 minutes into the presentation before that bond hearing, I just took a big sigh of relief, because the financial house of Tennessee is in great order, and we are one of 11 states that has a AAA bond rating. I'm proud of that. I'm proud that we're a pro-business state. And finally, I will say, I'm proud that when you look at the budget of the state of Tennessee, you know what we value, and what we value is education. And we will continue to work forward to having the best educational system that we possibly can have in the state of Tennessee. Thank you so much for letting me have some of your time this evening.
Thank you. Our next candidate is Lee Company President and CEO, Bill Lee. All right, let's go ahead and get started. You have previously said that making sure Tennesseans have good schools, good jobs, and safe neighborhoods would be your top priority as governor. Can you please expand on what that means from a practical standpoint and how you plan to get started on progress in each area?
Yeah, I do think my wife and I, we bought an old RV and we traveled to 95 counties in 95 days to start this off. And whether you're in West Tennessee, East Tennessee, urban, center, or rural communities, I do think people want a good job and a good school for their kid in a safe neighborhood. That's what really matters to everybody, and that's what I'll be focused on. Good jobs, you know, there's a lot of prosperity that's happening in our state. We have some really great things going on in some of our bigger cities from an economic vitality standpoint, but many of our rural communities in particular are being left behind. We have 15 counties that are designated distressed, poverty and joblessness. That puts them in the bottom 10% of counties in America, and that shouldn't happen in a state like ours. So we need to focus on those that are being left behind with regard to a good job. Good schools. We've made some progress in education, but we're in the bottom half of states in America in our educational outcomes. And America doesn't lead the world anymore in education. So we have a lot of work to do there. In particular, we have ignored, I believe, for the last 30 years, vocational, technical, and agricultural education. We can talk further about that. It's been my life as a career. And from a public safety standpoint, we have really safe neighborhoods in a lot of our state, but some areas we certainly do not. And some of our urban centers are in trouble with regard to safe neighborhoods, but we have an opioid epidemic that creates a law enforcement challenge even in our rural communities. So my belief is that everyone in Tennessee ought to have access to those three things. And until we do, we should continue to do whatever it takes to provide that access.
Well, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about that vocational training. As part of your rural roadmap, that's
Right.
something you've called for more investment in. Please give some specifics on what that would look like,
Right.
including how you would fund it.
Right. You referenced the rural roadmap. So when we did this 95 counties in 95 days tour in the RV, we really saw for certain something that I knew intuitively, and that was that we're in trouble in rural Tennessee. And if we don't do something about it, we're going to lose a way of life in rural Tennessee. And what happens in rural Tennessee matters to every Tennessean, whether they realize that or not. And the next governor has to have a definitive plan to do something about it. That's why last summer I rolled out something called a roadmap for rural Tennessee. I actually drove a tractor from my farm from Mountain City to Memphis. I am a person who lives on a fifth generation farm. I'm in the cattle business, but I also run a company called Lee Company, and we employ 1,200 skilled tradespeople, plumbers, pipe fitters, welders, electricians. I have a master plumber's license myself and an engineering degree, and now run a company of 1,200 folks. And our company was chosen last year and just announced this past week for the second year in a row. Lee Company was picked as the best company to work for in Nashville of all large companies. But we can't fill the skilled trade jobs that we have at Lee Company as the best employer to work for in Nashville, and that's because we have not developed a skilled workforce. Our company, so there's a lot of talk about vocational education in this governor's, I would guess you've already heard it 4 or 5 times tonight. Our company started a trade school 10 years ago. We've educated 1,000 people through that trade school: plumbing, pipe fitting, welding, electrical, HVAC technicians, because the problem is so bad. I have lived vocational training and vocational education and workforce my whole life. Now, you talked about funding. I also don't believe that government is the answer to some of our deepest problems. I'm a conservative guy who thinks that we, the people, are the answers. And I think that public-private, nonprofit partnerships are the answer. And I think that industry is the benefactor, is the beneficiary of workforce development. So they ought to be part of the solution. Companies like mine who partner with a public high school or who partner with post-secondary to provide training. Companies like mine who train 1,000 people in 10 years. There's a way to do this without building schools all over the state to provide for more vocational training. And that's the way to do it in a cost-effective way that doesn't raise taxpayer money, but that actually engages the people who know what kind of training we need most of all, engage them in the process of developing a skilled workforce.
But respectfully, as governor, how would you encourage businesses like your company to actually do that? It sounds like a great idea, but how would they get it done?
It is a great idea, and for one thing, businesses are highly incentivized to do it because of the very reason we started our own school. They're highly incentivized without any incentive from the government because we desperately need skilled workforce, and companies all across this state need that. But we certainly can incentivize them to do it as well. If we're going to, rather than invest in bricks and mortar and big government building programs across the state, let's invest in industry training young people in whatever skills are necessary for their particular industry. So we can incentivize companies to develop training programs.
Another piece of economic development is connectivity. What, as governor, would you propose to help give rural communities the opportunity to have more access to things like broadband internet? It's a very expensive thing for them to do on a municipality basis. How would you help?
It's a very expensive thing to do, but it's something that we don't have a choice about doing, from my perspective. I live in a rural community, and we don't have broadband access at my home. We don't even have cell service at my home. And so we have a dish, like a lot of people in rural communities that want broadband or that want to be able to use the internet. And if it's stormy or cloudy, we have to just watch TV, and if it doesn't work. And so I get around it in my community. Where I live, that's okay. I don't have any kids in school anymore. My daughter's graduated last week from college, my youngest, with an ag science degree. So I can work around it. But I've understood, just because of my own personal experience, how difficult it would be to run a business or to try to educate your children or to just operate in today's world without broadband access. We have no choice but to provide it. Now, it is expensive, and it is challenging, it is difficult, but that doesn't stop us from doing what we have to do to create economic prosperity in the regions that don't have it. So we make a combination of public, private, utility providers, private sector. We make partnerships, whatever it takes, to be certain that we do that. And let me say one thing about funding. There are a lot of things, people throw out, we need to do this, we need to spend that, and we need to build this. And I think the federal government found themselves doing that one small step at a time until they had $20 trillion worth of debt. And we can't do that as a state in Tennessee. But what we can do is we can manage a budget like you do in business. I run a $250 million company. We manage a budget. It's a low margin industry. We manage a budget to determine what we need and what we want, figure out the differences between those two, and then make sure that we can construct that budget in a way that we can afford and provide funding streams for those things that we need. And sometimes that comes at the expense of things that we want, and broadband's something we need.
Over what other things would you be willing to prioritize it to get it done?
I would expect that managing a budget in state government might be similar to that in a business like mine. So in my business, we would, if we needed technology for some IT technology that's going to be $500,000 investment in the company, we wouldn't go try to find $500,000 in one place. We would look at ways to find it in 15 different places around the company. And that's how you would do that in state budget. With a $37 billion budget, you start line item going down the line and find out where are those things, and you wouldn't wipe out entire programs of this or that, but where are those opportunities to cut to provide for those things you need.
Let's talk a little bit more about agriculture. You mentioned the tractor tour that you took and met some farmers, spent some time in some farm communities. You've previously said you support expansion of the Tennessee Agriculture Enhancement Program, which provides cost-share funds for long-term investments. What do you see as some successes of this program thus far, and also some of its struggles?
I live on a cattle farm. We have about 400 Hereford cattle. My family's been in the ag business for multiple generations, and so we actually process our meat at Yoder Brothers here in Paris, which is a whole different subject about not having enough meat processing and how we need to change that in this state. But I'm a person who's lived an entire life in the ag industry and understand it. We utilize ag enhancement on our own property. What ag enhancement is for me, and the reason that I think we should strengthen it, I've talked more about strengthening it than expanding it necessarily, but what ag enhancement does is it kickstarts economic development. It's like an investment in a startup company. And when you can, it's difficult. The ag industry is particularly difficult. It's 13% of our economy. We've only had an 11% growth in farming revenues in the last 5 years, and we've had a decline. We have 67,000 farmers. We've had a decline in that. Again, I'm going to refer back to my business, but when I run a company that has multiple offices around the region, and if one of our offices is struggling, even if the company's balance sheet is good, we're going to go to that office that's struggling and say, we're going to take the resources of senior management and focus on that. The ag industry is critical and crucial to the future of Tennessee, and we're not just trying to preserve it. We actually could lead the nation in agriculture in many ways if we took senior management resources and focused them in ag, and particularly in West Tennessee and Northwest Tennessee. There's no doubt. My family's from Memphis and from Fayette County, and I've been traveling to this part of the state my whole life. And in the last couple of years, 30 or 40 times, talking to leaders, there's no doubt that West Tennessee has received sort of the short end of the stick for economic development and for focus on this side of the state. And yet, it absolutely needs it, particularly in the ag segment. So we have to focus on it. I could go on about that, but we have to focus on it. So the next administration needs to.
The next administration is also going to have to consider tariff proposals by the Trump administration.
Right.
What are your thoughts on those proposals, which could have a large effect on those farmers?
Yeah. My hope is that Donald Trump is doing one of the things that he does well, which is negotiate, and that he has thrown something out there in hopes that it's a leverage point for him. I do believe that. I think there are possibilities, however, that leverage point ends up being a tariff, and that's particularly troubling for grain farmers, and that's a lot of the ag industry in the state. So I think we've got to prepare for that, and one of the ways we do that, and if you're in business, and actually our beef business, we had a restaurant that was the major consumer of our products. We sold meat to a farm table restaurant, and they found a cheaper supplier, and we lost a big piece of business all at once. But that we knew it was coming, and so we looked at alternative sources for which we could sell our products. And that's what we got to do in this state. The state doesn't solve the problem, but the state sits down with those producers and says, how can we help you find alternative places? Because we do have countries that we're not going to have tariffs with. How can we replace those revenues? That would be part of my plan there.
Those producers are also going to be thinking about their bottom lines.
Right.
In your viewpoint, what would be a break-even bushel price on soybeans, which is one of the crops that would be affected if those tariffs go into place?
You should have asked me about beef on the hoof. I could have told you that steers are $1.20 and heifers are $1.05.
Also,
but I will say, I was at Weekly County Farm Bureau today, and I do know that beans are about $10, and I would guess that break even is about $9.50.
I appreciate all of your answers. We now have a final moment if you'd like to give a closing statement.
Great. I appreciate the privilege and the opportunity to be here. And for those of you who I've never met before, I will tell you, and I've already explained to you that I'm a cattle farmer and deeply concerned about and deeply encouraged about the future of the ag industry in this state. Met with a lot of companies around that in this run for me because of my deep interest in that. I'm a business guy who has who's lived a life of vocational technical education. I have a real heart for that as well that I've already expressed. I'm also a man who, because of a great tragedy in my life that God used in a very powerful way to change me in a very profound way, I'm a man who decided, and because of that perspective change, realized that the highest call of my life is to serve other people, and at the end of the day, I want to spend my life doing things that make life better for other people. I share that because it's part of the journey of me ending up running for governor, an unlikely place of running for governor. As someone, I've never worked for government, and I've never run for office. I'm the only person in this race who's never worked for the government nor never run for office. But I landed there because of that desire to impact people for good led me to working in nonprofits. And I chaired one of the largest nonprofits in the state called, it's YMCA in Middle Tennessee, and they have an at-risk inner-city program called YCAP. I met a kid in the inner city at a YCAP lunch. That interaction with him profoundly impacted me, and I got involved in his life 5 years ago. And I started driving into his very troubled neighborhood once a week and spending one evening a week with Adam. Yesterday, by the way, I went to Adam's senior class signing day celebration where he announced where he was going to go to college. That interest in that young man and desire to make his life better really made mine better, but it also gave me a passion around his education. I got involved in moving him from one school to another and seeing a profound change and realizing that not only his life could be changed by education, but that tens of thousands of children deserve the same opportunity to have a good education. So I got involved in education policy, and it sparked an interest in me around public policy and public service. I had a similar experience with a man that I mentored coming out of prison through a prison ministry program, a reentry program, and I mentored him once a week at 5:30 in the morning for an hour every week, which developed in me a real passion and an interest in all things public safety. And going back to good job, good school for your kids, safe neighborhood, I ended up doing public policy work around tort reform and business, public policy in education, and public policy in public safety. And that's when I began to think, you know what, maybe my best opportunity, could a guy like me run for office and run for the governor? You know, I don't have political experience, but I actually think the Founding Fathers envisioned a country when they founded this country, that we would self-govern, that we the people would govern, and that regular people from the private sector would engage in the public square and impact and bring outside influence, nonprofit passion into some of the biggest challenges we have as a nation. And that's how they envisioned it, and that's why I decided to do this. And this is the executive branch of government, not judicial, not legislative. And I've lived a life of executive leadership. And I also believe that the most powerful form of leadership is servant leadership. And I'd be honored to serve. As we make Tennessee not only a better place for 6.5 million people, but a state that actually can lead the nation. And I'd be honored to serve as that leader. I'll close with this. The RV that my wife and I drive around, there's a scripture reference on the bottom of it. We put it on there to remind us every day we get on it. It's Psalm 71:14. It says, "As for me, I will always have hope." I had a hopeless season in my life, but I knew where to find hope. And there are those in Tennessee that need hope for good job, good school, safe neighborhood. I have a great deal of hope that we can lead the nation with the right leader, and I'd be honored to serve as that leader. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final candidate this evening is United States Representative Diane Black. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. You have previously said you would place economic development, healthcare, and education among your top priorities if elected governor. Those are issues important to most, if not all, Tennesseans, and also issues on which your opponents have said they would work as well. Different parts of Tennessee have different struggles, though, in each of these issue areas. How will you prioritize goals to improve in each one?
So yeah, those are three big issues, and you're right. One of the things that I love about the last year now that I have traveled throughout the state, and of course I have 19 counties right now, but as I've traveled throughout the state, I know that culturally it is very different, economically it's very different, and so the needs are different depending upon where you go. But let's just start out with education to begin with, because one of the things that we have seen is that, and I know other candidates have talked about this, is that we're leaving about 25% of our students behind. There's been a lot of focus over the last 10 years or so about higher education. But what I hear from my manufacturers, and particularly in rural areas, is that there is not an educated workforce. And there are not students prepared when they come out of school to do those kinds of jobs that are so needed, such as the welders and the plumbers and the pipe fitters. And so one of the things I want to do is look at what I believe has been forgotten and left behind, and that is the career and technical programs. But I know that the other candidates in additional have talked about that. Let me talk about it in just a little bit of a different way. First of all, I believe that we have a responsibility with helping students to discover what their God-given talents are. And you might say, well, how do you do that? Well, I had the opportunity to have an aptitude test or an inventory done when I was in the early grades of high school. I think I took mine in the 8th grade. And what I found out was that I was to be a nurse or an engineer. I ended up in nursing, and I love my nursing today, and it is absolutely the career that I should have been in. I know that some students are already taking these aptitude tests, but here's what's happening, is they're just being put into a drawer, and they're really not getting the kind of education that the students need to understand what that aptitude is. So I want to have career counselors to be with the students, to help them to look at that test and determine what it is that not only do they have an aptitude to do, but also to line up some of the things they might have an interest. And then do a dual track, where we can have students that tend to be more in the career and technical to get those skills, and those that tend to be more in the academic to go in that direction. Now, that's not to say that you get stuck in one or the other. And I'll give you an example of why that's important. I was at a career and technical center that is a very mature center over in East Tennessee, in Loudoun County in Lenore City. It's about 12 years old, and they're doing a really good job over there. And so what I saw was an engineering class, and I went into the 9th grade class, and I asked the instructor there, who, by the way, was a retired engineer who came back to teach. I said, well, how many of these students in here are going to go to college? And he said, well, we won't know in the 9th grade. We'll watch where they go. But then the bell rang, and the 12th graders came in, and I said, well, what about this class? He said, every child in this class is going to college. As a matter of fact, we have some students that have already been recruited to Yale and Harvard for their engineering. And so by the time they get to the 12th grade, you can see they may be crossing back and forth in the path, but they have an opportunity to be able to leave school with either a skill or a pathway to success. And that way we're not leaving that 25% behind. We're really actually helping them. And some of the students over there in the nursing program, the certified nursing assistants, they were getting their certificates and working in nursing homes while they were still in school. So every child, and I think it's our responsibility in education to help every child to find out what their God-given talents are and put them on the right pathway.
So breaking that down then from a practical standpoint and creating those dual tracks, how would you propose to pay for that in our schools?
Well, the money is already there to help students to go to college and to have to have counselors to help them go into college. I think we just need to take a look at those programs. Now, one of the things that we can also do is we bring those programs into the school, and this is being done in some places around the state. We just need to make sure we bring it to scale, is to go out and ask industries that are in the area, and I know even in my 19 counties, I'll have industries say, Diane, I can't find an educated workforce, but if you allow me to bring in my equipment and technology, I will help you train those students right there in the school, so when they graduate, they're going to come and work in my place. And so we can work with the private sector to have them help us to bring the proper training into the high schools and for those students to, again, graduate with either a skill or a pathway to success.
Would you propose incentives if not all businesses are as ready to help as the one you just mentioned?
Well, my experience so far is that they're willing to help because they want to have an educated workforce. And my experience is that they're saying not only, and they have done this in places around the state, not only are we willing to put our equipment in there, but we're also willing to send some of our own employees to the school to help these students to become educated.
Let's talk about healthcare, another one of those top issues for you. Hospital closures have been a real problem in rural areas of West Tennessee, a situation blamed in part on the state's failure to expand Medicaid. You've long said that you oppose expansion, so what are your proposals to strengthen health care in rural areas?
Well, this is certainly an area that is of great interest to me, but also experience that I have as a nurse. I've been a nurse for more than 45 years, and I actually came into the legislature because of the issue of TennCare at the time. That TennCare, I'm working in the hospital, I see what the cost is and the lack of quality of care, and it's what I really, that I ran for office to begin with. And we were able to unwind that here in our state. But one of the things that happened during that time is that our public health centers, Department of Health, were really decimated. There aren't a whole lot of them left, but the ones that now the governor, and I will certainly give him great credit for bringing about and bringing back up our public health departments, because they are a good place for simple, decent care, and especially in the rural areas. And I'll give you an example of this in Putnam County, right there in my district, in Cookeville. There is a wonderful brand new public health center that is being utilized not only by Putnam County, but those 5 rural counties that are around. It's about a 20-minute drive from whichever area you come. And this is a good way to do simple, decent care. And I think we need to look at that model and do more of that. And I know that there's also, with hospitals closing down, a real concern, especially about emergencies, and looking at how do we make sure that there's care when that time is so important. And I'm looking at models that are around the country where they do have not only an emergency room, but maybe a few beds that they can also admit, so we can at least stabilize, especially patients are having strokes or heart attack, where time is really of the essence, and stabilize them there. And if they need more care, such as a critical care unit, we can then transfer them. But if it is something that's an observation, there are beds there that they can at least be observed. So I think we need to think outside the box a little bit. We know that this whole industry is changing, and there are models around the country that I would like to look at and perhaps copy right here in this state.
Let's talk about economic development. A large portion of that, particularly in this area, comes from agriculture. In a forum last fall, you said you felt farmers needed the same sorts of incentives available to other small businesses. What specifically do you propose to give assistance to Tennessee farmers who are in many ways the backbone of this area?
Well, this is very timely because next week in Congress we're going to be passing the Farm Bill. And we wanted to be very sure that our farmers were taken care of in the Farm Bill, especially with their assistance with insurance for their crops. This is very important right now because farmers over the last 5 years have not seen the kind of economic growth that they needed, and they're really needing that assistance. I will say that Secretary Pruitt, who I know that many people know, who is a farmer himself and has a farmer background, he does a really good job in making sure that the farmers are recognized, and that in the Farm Bill in particular, that we're going to continue to make sure that the farmers have the assistance they need, so that when they don't have a good year, that they do have that assurance that they're going to have some help with their crops that maybe perhaps haven't been produced because of weather or other circumstances.
What are your thoughts on the Trump administration's tariff proposals?
Well, I know that we have a president who is a strong negotiator, and he negotiates in a lot of different areas, but this is one where he really felt like we were not getting a good deal with some of the trade agreements that have been signed over the years. He's brought China to the table, and he wants to make sure that America is first and that we're treated fairly. We have a large trade deficit, not just in farming, but also in other areas. And so I know he's bringing China to the table. In particular, it's very important with the soybeans here in our state because it is a very large crop, so I'm happy that he's doing that, and I am encouraged that Secretary Pruitt is working with him. But I think that at the end of the day, we're going to see that we're going to get some fair deals with the work that the President is doing in negotiating these trade deals.
One thing that's on the mind of farmers is that bottom line for them at their home farm. In your mind, what would be a break-even bushel price for soybeans?
Well, I'm not a farmer, but this is timely again that I would know about soybeans because we have been talking about soybeans in Congress with the Farm Bill, and I believe they're at about $10 a bushel right now. And I think that the break-even is somewhere in the $9 area. But, you know, we don't want them to just break even. We want them to be successful. We want them to grow. We want them to grow their farms and to be able to hand those farms down to their families because it's so important that we don't get into a place where we're not growing food here in the United States. We never know when it might be a time that food that is being brought into our country that will have some kind of disagreement with that country, and we won't be able to feed our people. And so it is so important in so many ways that farmers continue to stay strong and to be able to hand those farms on, because it is important that we grow our food here in this country and we can sustain ourselves in times of emergency. I do want to mention one thing that I have had the opportunity to learn more about, and that's the mega site. And I have been talking to some farmers and some business people here in West Tennessee. First of all, the mega site has now been 13 years of discussion in Nashville with not much being done. I call that Nashville neglect. I think it's a boondoggle to spend $140 million of the taxpayer dollars and not do something with that site. But this is interesting because the culture here, obviously in this part of this part of the state in West Tennessee, is a culture of farmers. And it was brought to my attention that maybe we ought to think about something culturally that would fit this area to use for the mega site. And so in listening to that, I think there's a good case to be made to at least use a part of that mega site to address the issue of farming, where we could have the crops grown here, processed, packaged, distributed here, that we could even talk about maybe bringing the UT's research, agricultural research, at least a part of that on that campus, as well as making sure that we can bring the Department of Agriculture, maybe their West Tennessee campus, onto that campus, and to really grow that area in a way that would culturally fit West Tennessee. And so I'm open, been talking to farmers and open to that discussion as the governor to at least address part of that site for our farmers and for West Tennessee's culture.
In considering the mega site, have you thought of a number in your mind at which you would just say, okay, no more money? I mean, you've mentioned the tens of millions of dollars that have already been spent and already projected that need to be spent, but do you have a number in mind at which enough is enough?
Well, I will say that the amount of money that's going to be needed to dig or to put in the wastewater pipeline, I'm told 50 miles. I've heard anywhere from $70 million additional dollars to $200 million additional dollars. One of the nice things about doing this as an agricultural site is that it would be bio waste, which means you wouldn't need a big pipeline like that, as you would in some other industries where you had environmental issues, where the processing of the waste could just be processed right there on site and put right back out into the land. So I'm excited about that as well. I do have a concern about the fact that it is so far out, and it does take some time for people to travel from, if it's Memphis, about a 40-minute drive out to the mega site. So that's the reason why I believe that looking at something that's culturally right for this area might be a real answer to having that mega site get up and running without perhaps spending all that money on that pipeline.
That wraps up the questions that I have. There's time if you'd like to give a brief closing statement to the audience.
Well, thank you. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to be able to talk a little bit about why I believe that I am uniquely qualified to be the next governor of this state, and how maybe there's a difference, or there is a difference between the other candidates. Look, every candidate that came up here tonight is smart. They have experience. I know all of us love our state. But I think there are some things that make me uniquely qualified to be the next governor of this state. So let me start out with my background, because I think it's important for people to know that my background helps me to be who I am and the way I make decisions, and that goes to my parents. My parents were Depression era. Neither one of them had more than a 9th grade education. I lived in public housing for the first years of my life until my father was able to make enough money to buy a little house that my parents still live in today. They're 92 and 93 years old. One of the best things that happened to me is to go to a high school outside of the community that I lived in, and there was a gentleman by the name of Mr. Richard Whiting, who was my counselor, who asked me in the 9th grade, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And I said, "I want to be a nurse, but I don't think I can do that because my mama says we don't have enough money for me to go to college." And he said, "No one's going to give you that. You're going to work hard for it." And he was with me for 4 years of my education to make sure that I got good grades. And I got mostly good grades except for geometry, which I must admit I had a hard time with. But I was able to get a scholarship to be able to go to nursing school and do what I still love to do to today. I've been in nursing now for 45 years. I still have my license. From my parents, I learned never, ever, ever give up. And you will find that about me. I don't give up easily. The second thing that I learned is that I should stick to my Christian values that my parents taught me. And from my counselor, I learned high expectations and high standards. And I take that with me today. As I say, I am a nurse, but I've also been an educator. I taught at a college. I ran a foundation. I was the executive director of our hospital foundation, so I have a business background. I started 2 small businesses myself, and my husband and I started a business with 4 employees and grew it to over 1,000 employees. So I have a background in so many areas. I never intended on being in public policy, but as a nurse, back in the late 1990s, when TennCare was here and watching what it was doing to our state, and both the quality of care and cost of care, I decided I couldn't sit by and do nothing. I've served in the state legislature, in the state house, the state senate, and I have been honored the last 8 years to be able to serve in Congress, where I am the only Tennessean that has ever served as the chairman of the Budget Committee and passed the most conservative budget in 20 years. I'm very proud of that. Here at the state legislature, I fought against the state income tax, and we were able to win that. You can tell I like to fight. I like to fight for things that I think are right. I also fought for SJR 127, which ended up being Amendment 1 that many of you may have voted on, which is the most pro-life legislation that we have ever passed in this state, and I'm very proud of that. And in Congress, this last year, I was able to work with the President and my Ways and Means Committee on a bill on tax cuts and the Jobs Act that has now, as I travel around, I'm hearing what a significant difference that's made in the lives of families and also small businesses, and I'm very proud of that. Tennessee needs a governor who knows how to hit the ground and get things done, and I know how to do that. But we also need a governor that does something else, and this is why I believe that I am uniquely qualified, and that is to protect our Tennessee values. Listen, we have people moving into this state, and I talk to them all the time. They come from California. They come from New York. And they say, but that's not the way we do it in California. That's not the way we do it in New York. And I say, if you don't like our Tennessee values, then go back to New York. Go back to California, because it is the way we do it here in the state. We know right is right and wrong is wrong. We know truth is truth. We know God is God. And we know a life is a life. We stand for the flag. And I will not allow sanctuary cities in this state as well. So I will jealously protect those things that I think make this state so special. This state is special because of our Tennessee values, and I will protect those. So I ask for your vote, I ask for your support, And I ask for your prayers for myself and my family as we travel this great state. Thank you for having us here tonight, and thank you for
Thank you.
sponsoring this fund.
This actually concludes our forum, but before you leave, I would like to ask you to join me in thanking our moderator tonight. As we opened up, remember the most important thing that you can do as a citizen of this great nation is to vote. That is your voice. So I encourage you to take what you heard tonight into the voting booth and to make your voice be heard. I encourage you to enjoy the rest of the evening here on our beautiful campus. If you are interested in the WestStar Leadership Program, please visit the utm.edu website and you can click on WestStar. Thank you again for your attendance tonight and safe travels. If the WestStar